The topic is surrender and self-effort, and I think there is lot of confusion because people generally think that surrender means there is no self-effort at all. So our point is mainly that, but we wanted to base it on Bhagavad Gita, but that was thinking, we thought that it will be a longer session for 4 days or so. Earlier it was like that when the title was fixed, then it became 3, now it has become 2 days. So naturally I have to change the whole subject, and it may not be entirely on Bhagavad Gita. What I proposed to say at that time is that Bhagavad Gita is suggesting us various kinds of sadhana. It is one sadhana only, but approached through various paths. And all of them finally lead to surrender. That was my idea. But I think we will discuss in a general manner, not so much of detail we can go into in this 2 days, 2 hours, 2.5 hours period. See, surrender, actually the surrender word we are using for Sanskrit word, Sharanagati. One is Sharanagati, the other was Atma Samarpanam. Another is, it can be called as a Nirapeksha also, but there are other terms that in Yoga Shastra, the other term used is Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana. Those who are used to the various Kriya Yoga practice, this is the term used by Patanjali. Pranidhana. Pranidhana. Pra means Prakarshena. Nidhana means Ashraya Bodha. That means taking complete refuge in God. That is, surrender means taking total, complete refuge in God. Now naturally, we find often people say that I have surrendered to God, I have surrendered to God. Our Gurudev, Swami Narayana Tirtha was speaking in a satsang, but I have taken that in Jamshedpur a few years ago, where he has discussed this Sharanagati as 5th Purushartha, of the ultimate self-effort, where he has mentioned in one place that people say, I have surrendered to God, I have surrendered to God. Is it so easy? We don't know whether God exists or not. If at all he exists, where does he stay? What he likes? Nobody knows. How can we surrender to God? It is not at all easy. The real surrender is tested when the God comes in the form of a Guru. That is, when we become a disciple of a Guru, Sadguru, then the test of surrender comes, because from that time onwards we are supposed to follow the words of the Sadguru. So whatever he says we have to follow. If you have surrendered, then every step you have to follow his instructions, his guidance, and there again and again we fail. So the test of surrender, real surrender, comes when the God appears as Guru before us. This is what Swami Narayana Tirtha has said, and almost every sadhaka has confirmed also. It is so. We have found disciples saying that, Swamiji, I would like to join your ashram and stay at your, हमने तन मन धन सब कुछ आपको सौंप दिया है, आप ही के चरण में हम रह जाएंगे. स्वामी जी इज टेलिंग हिम दैट नहीं, ये तुम्हारे लिए ठीक नहीं है, आश्रम में तुम नहीं रह पाओगे, तुम तो हमारे अपने फैमिली के साथ भी नहीं रह पाते हो, अपनी स्त्री के साथ झगड़ा है, बच्चों के ऊपर हमेशा पीटते हो, किसी के साथ तुम्हारा हारमोनी नहीं है, प्रोफेशन में भी कभी हारमोनी नहीं है, आश्रम में तो बहुत कठिन है आपके लिए, क्योंकि आश्रम में तो सब बहुत लोग जो साधक है वो कई जगह से आए हैं, उनका कल्चर, उनका बिहेवियर सब कुछ अलग अलग है, यहाँ पे तुम्हारे लिए ये ठीक नहीं होगा. बट ही इज सेइंग अगेन, नहीं स्वामी जी, हम तो सब कुछ आपको समर्पण कर दिए हैं, हम यहीं पे रह जाएंगे. So even when it is told that See, when you surrender, it means whatever the Guru is saying you should do. Guru is asking you to go to some other place where you have a small house or cottage and do your tapasya there. But the disciple is saying that no, that is not right for me. I have to be in the ashram. When the Guru is saying don't be in the ashram, go there, the disciple says that no, I have surrendered, so I will be in the ashram. It is like somebody claiming that to Vishnu that I will be in Vaikuntha. Vishnu is saying that no, Vaikuntha is not the place for you, go somewhere else. But no, I have surrendered to, I will be in Vaikuntha. So this is the kind of surrender generally we do, not understanding what it is. In Pondicherry, Mother had mentioned in one place that every sadhak, when they wholesomely join the ashram, when they come to the ashram leaving everything, they say that, Mother, I have surrendered everything to you. But alas, what they surrender is only common sense, nothing else. When they come to are you able to follow? What they have surrendered is common sense, not any other ahankara, their ragadvesha, their desires and all. They don't surrender. They surrender only their common sense. Mother has made that statement. It is true of all ashrams in a way. Not for all, but generally. So we have to understand what is this surrender. When we are saying refuge or ashraya bodha, bodha means the feeling of refuge, that I have taken refuge. If we have taken refuge, then what should happen to us? Should there not be a feeling of I am completely in the lap of the Lord or lap of the Guru, or I don't have any worry, any anxiety, any desire, anything at all? Ashraya bodha means what? That I have complete refuge in the most powerful, in the Almighty. So He will do whatever is good for me. He is all-knowing, He is all-powerful. So He knows where lies my ultimate auspicious goal. So He will take me through the path wherever lies my auspicious goal. If it is so, then whatever happens to me, I should be happily embracing whatever comes from the world to me. But are we doing it? Suppose I have lost the relatives, I have lost profession, I have lost property. If all these things have been done by God, so why am I wailing, complaining that I have lost this, I have lost that? If I have surrendered, then whatever happens, it has been done by the Lord. So I have to accept everything. Whatever comes in life, we have to accept. So this ashraya bodha, or this feeling of refuge, unless it is generated in our mind, surrender has not taken place. Am I correct? If I have surrendered, then this refuge, feeling of refuge should be there. That ashraya bodha should be there. I will not be agitated or distracted by anything happening in life at all. I will go to further detail that what is this ashraya bodha. Because we have to always test our surrender from the results. If we look into the further results down the line, this ashraya bodha should be, that feeling of refuge should be translated into dissolution of all abhava bodha. What is abhava bodha? Always feeling of lack, insufficiency. Are we not always having a feeling of lack, insufficiency? That is why we run after all the things. So the feeling of lack, insufficiency, abhava bodha, the feeling of insufficiency, lack, should completely vanish from the mind. Otherwise the surrender is not complete. Surrender has not been done. That is why the result of surrender is called nirapeksha. Nirapeksha means non-expectation. See, using the words to make it practical before you, that how we are to know what is this surrender. Nirapeksha means non-expectation, means not expecting anything from anywhere in the world, from anybody, anytime. How many any I have added? Not expecting anything from anybody or anywhere in the world, anytime. What does it mean? That anything happening in life, he will not be shaken at all. He can embrace anything happening in life. So such a person, what a tremendous confidence and unshakability he will have. Will he fear anything in the world? Because anything happening, even if death comes, he will embrace death as his Lord, as it is sent by the Lord. The Lord has sent him the death. If any other things, suppose my naukri goes, service goes, or my property is lost, well, the Lord has taken away the property. It should be like that. There is a story in Kerala of one Nambudiri priest, very famous for his devotion. He was not having child for 12 years. After 12 years, he got one son. And they were very happy. So the Annaprasana they were observing with lot of fanfare, invited many people, because he got the child after 12 years. So the Annaprasana was done with lot of pomp. Many people had arrived. Then finally, when the child was wanted for some ceremony, the child was not found. You were looking around, people were looking around. Finally, it was discovered that people have been bringing presents for the child, because they were all invited. Invitees all will be bringing presents. And they were keeping the presents on the bed. It so happened that at one point the presents covered the child. And over that it went on dumping. They went on dumping the presents over the child. And out of suffocation the child died. Now a son he got after 12 years, and with so much of pomp he was observing the Annaprasana. In that function, by such a amazing accident, the child passed away. Now normally what will we do? In any house you will find people will start wailing, why have you got, why have you taken this child away, you have given after 12 years, what will happen to me? I may not have any more child. So many, the wife will cry, the husband will cry. But this Nambudiri looked at the dead child for a moment and then sang in revelry. When the Unnikrishnan, the Lord Balakrishna, that is the, what do you call in English? Young Krishna, is dancing in my heart. What is the harm if the outside child is not there at all? It's a famous song in Malayalam. Many of the Keralites may know. When small Krishna is dancing in my heart, do I need a child outside? So, when it happened, it's not that he was not happy in having the child. He was very happy, that is why they had arranged everything. But when the situation came, it is a gift from the Lord. As the child was a gift from the Lord, the death of the child is also a gift from the Lord. So it will not distract him, it will not upset him, it will not make him, it will not overwhelm him by the dukkha or anything. Maybe he was shedding tears, I don't know. Definitely he was shedding tears. But in that tear, in those tears, there was definitely a deep ananda. In that dukkha, there must have been a deep ananda of embracing the Lord in his heart. So this nirapeksha, that not expecting anything, whatever happening in life, accepting that as a gift from the Lord, it is the highest position. In Bhagavatam, in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said in the manner that the Lord is saying, the Bhagavan is saying, Nirapeksham munim shantam nirvairam samadarshanam anubrajamyaham nityam puyeyetyanghirenubhihi. He says, Nirapeksham munim shantam nirvairam samadarshanam anuvrajamyaham nityam puyetyanghirenubhihi. This is the statement of the Lord. Although it is written by Vyasadeva, but he is putting it in the words of the Lord. The Lord is saying, a muni, a saint, who is shanta nirvaira, who is peaceful and not having any enmity in his mind. Nirvaira means no shatru. We will immediately think that he does not have any enemy. He may have hundreds of enemies, but he doesn't feel that he has any enemy. Do you get it? Nirvaira means our lack of enmity in our mind. Outside them, people may behave inimical with him. They may even kill him. But he doesn't feel that anybody is inimical to me. Such a person is called Nirvairam. Not that he does not have any enemy around. Maybe he may not have any enemy, but that is not the point. The point is, in his mind, there is no inimical feeling about anybody. Always there is Maitri in his mind. Nirapeksham is the first word. He is Nirapeksham, means he is non-expectant. He does not expect anything from anywhere, from anybody in the world. What is the position, what is the state of such a person? The God says that I always follow that devotee. A devotee who has these qualities, I always follow him so that I can purify myself with the dust of his feet. God follows the devotee. So that God says, I follow the devotee so that I can purify myself. The God can purify himself by the dust of the feet of the devotee. That means what? It is written by a human being. That means the saint author Vyasadeva has given the highest position, even higher than God himself, for a devotee who is absolutely non-expectant, who is Nirapeksha, who is Nirvaira, who is Samadarshanam, who has the evenness of the vision. Now, these are the standards of the surrender or Sharanagati. That means if surrender is real, if it is perfect, then these are the symptoms from which we can test how much I have surrendered. Maybe we have not have 100%, but we can always judge from these characteristics how much we have gone for. Suppose earlier, even if the food is not a little different from what I like, I used to get very agitated and start shouting. Or if somebody has told me something, I used to get so agitated that I will not sleep at night even. So the mind used to get agitated by any input in the world. So we can look into our mind and find out that, is my mind getting less agitated now or more agitated now? That will tell us whether I am advancing in the spiritual path or whether I am advancing in my surrender or not. Like that, in sadhana we have to test that all the things are theoretical as such. How will it become practical? When we test from our behavior, then only it will become a real sadhana. Whether we are advancing or not, we will know. That is the path of spirituality. In religion, you don't have any test as such. You are worshipping 40 years, 50 years. I have been worshipping the idol. I don't know whether he has been pleased, whether I have advanced or he has come closer to me. Nothing we worry about. But spirituality starts when we question that. I have been worshipping the God. Is he there or not? If he is there, what does he like? What does he not like? So the whole emphasis gets inverted. It was earlier, the focus was on an external God somewhere in the sky or in the heavens. Now the whole emphasis gets inverted. The focus is on the personality. That what is happening to me as a devotee? Am I behaving like a devotee or not? That becomes the focus. You can find in Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter itself, the introductory chapter itself, after Krishna has presented the Sankhya Yoga, that means Sankhya Yoga means Jnana Yoga, the truth of the soul, the concept of the soul, the concept of Brahman. He has presented to its ultimate. Immediately, Arjuna asks, Sthitaprajnasya ka bhasha. Swamiji has already explained that, well, Krishna, you have explained everything about the soul, about the truth, about the ultimate reality. But that is all abstract. I would like to know what happens to the human being when he realizes the truth. Do you get the practicality of the question? We can talk about soul, we can talk about Brahman for throughout lifetime, we can finish all the Upanishads, all the Vedas, everything we have learned. But what are we talking about? We are talking about our own identity, our real identity, our soul. So whatever the characteristics of the soul we are talking about, they must become my own characteristics. Then only the knowledge is becoming real. We say that the knowledge is like fire. We call it Jnana Agni. Knowledge is called Jnana Agni. Why? Because if it is a picture of a fire, you cannot do anything with that. Can you cook your food with the picture of a fire? Can you burn a dead body with the picture of a fire? You cannot do anything. You don't get the warmth from there. But to do it, you have to have a real fire. Like this Jnana Agni, it is called Agni because when it is pursued, when it becomes practiced, it becomes our own, first hand. The knowledge becomes first hand. Then only it will have the power of transformation, like the fire. Otherwise, the bookish knowledge is like a picture of the fire. Whatever, I might have learned the entire Vedas, but unless I have practiced and the fire is burning within me, it has no value at all. It is only, it will increase our ego, it will increase our ahankara, that I have learned this, I have learned that. Nothing else will happen. So, the spiritual sadhana is everything, everything of spirituality is dealing with our own personality. So the test is with our own personality. I said that this surrender has to be tested first by the ashraya bodha, by the feeling of refuge in us. We should feel the refuge in us. That I have surrendered to God or to Guru or whoever. Immediately there should come down a lightness, a peace which you have never felt. A removal of all stress and strain. People talk about stress. No stress should be there. When we have taken a refuge, then there cannot be any stress at all. So we will have a complete, a sky-like feeling within, a refuge, a feeling of refuge, as if I am held by an eternal, in the eternal lap. I am lying in the eternal lap. There is no anxiety, nothing at all, no fear. There cannot be any fear at all. And this feeling of refuge, if you cannot test, we have to test by the corresponding qualities. What are they? First, we should be free of the abhava bodha. There should not be any lack, feeling of any lack or insufficiency in us. I am saying in the superlative degree, but you can always compare whether the insufficiency, feeling of lack, etc. has decreased or not. That we can always test. There should be lack of ragadvesha. What is ragadvesha? Likes and dislikes. We always run after things we like, we run away from things we dislike. We always work to gain whatever we like. We don't want to lose whatever we like. We try to avoid whatever we dislike. These are the main disturbing elements in our life. So when we have taken refuge in the lap of God or truth or Guru, then whatever comes we are embracing it. So there cannot be any such feeling of raga and dvesha. If a death has taken place, I embrace it. If a loss has taken place, I embrace it equally. If I have lost my job, then also I embrace it equally. See, if we look into our life, right from birth, what are we running after? If we inquire, why have we come here? why are you working? Suppose you are working in a factory. Why are you working? You will say, I want the salary. I have to maintain my family. By maintaining family, what will happen? No, they will have proper food. We will be having a happy life. I will become happy. You inquire about any effort you are putting in life. The end point will be, by that I will become happy. Even if you are sacrificing your life, suppose for independence of the country also you are committing, you are sacrificing your life, then also by sacrificing my life I will become happy. Is it not so? Even in spirituality also, why are you meditating? Because I get lot of bliss in meditation. So always there is a tendency to gain joy, to become happy. If you look into the whole life, you will find that all the self-effort, all your purushakara, all your effort you have put, it is only to become happy. Now that means we are missing the happiness. Now we want to become happy, that is, we are aiming for happiness. Does it not mean that there is a lack of happiness? There is a lack in us, there is an insufficiency in us, which we are trying to fulfill. Am I clear? When we are running after happiness, does it not mean that there is a lack of happiness in us? We are suffering from an insufficiency right from the beginning. That is why we are running after various things. You look into the world, who has become permanently happy by gaining anything material or worldly? Anybody? Suppose the richest people of the world, you think, are they happy with their riches they have got? Swamiji told you the other day, we read it in Reader's Digest in 1970 or so. He has pictured 17 richest people of the world. What was their end? Either they have committed suicide, or they have ended their life in jail, or they have become mad. These are the three things those were the olden days richest people. Now we have many multi-billionaire and trillionaire and all. But you look into them, even then they are wanting more and more money, and for that they are ready to even harm the society. Some of the products they are doing, or some of the activities, they are harming the society, harming their own children also. That also they don't think. Suppose to gain the profit of a factory, if you are throwing the effluent without purifying it or into the river or so, by that what is happening? His profit is increasing. But that polluted water, polluted air, is he not breathing? Is he not taking? If not he, at least his next generation and next to next generation, what will happen to them? So as we are spoiling the earth, we are spoiling our own progeny also. But that much also they don't think. That means they are completely overwhelmed by the money. They are slave to money. That they have acquired millions or billions of rupees have not made them fulfilled about money. They want still more money, even at the expense of their own health, or health of their progeny, or health of the society, or the welfare of the society. What does it mean? That no material gain can ever fulfill a person. Nachiketa, 7-year-old, in Kathopanishad, he said, Na vittena tarpaniyo manushyo. He told Yamaraja, the teacher, he told. 7-year-old Nachiketa. What is that? Na vittena tarpaniyo manushyo. That man can never be satisfied by anything material. 7-year-old boy, he said, that means what? If we think, we can know that this is the truth, but we never look back and think what we are doing. So we are running after joy because we are lacking that joy somewhere. Now, our Upanishads Upanishads say, they record their experimental result, their discovery, that joy is not outside. We are for nothing running after things, thinking that I will become joy. I will have joy out of it. The more intensely we desire something, more intense is the desire, the joy is also more after the desire is fulfilled. Is it not so? Small desires, it will not give you so much of joy. But when we are intensely desiring something, if that is fulfilled, the joy also will be more. But it will not remain. That also will go very soon. What is happening is that when the desire is intense, that intensity of the desire is taking away all small, small desires. When you want something intensely, all other small, small things, even you may forget food for that purpose. You may not take bath, you may not have food because you are intensely wanting something else. That means other things are inferior. The other things are not important, less important in comparison to that. So when you get that, what happens for a moment is that the moment that desire is fulfilled, the mind becomes calm. Because it is not disturbed by any of the desires. The intense desire has taken care of all other desires. So when that is fulfilled, the mind is free of desire. So the joy you get is a little more than fulfilling of small, small desires of some rasgulla or this or that. That also is giving you joy, but it is not a big joy. So if we think well, then our rishis declared that the joy lies within. It is a self-property. It is a property of our soul. It is always welling forth. It is a characteristic of the soul. But because our mind is always distracted by the likes and dislikes, by the desires and hatred, the mind is always disturbed. So we are not able to feel the joy. Whenever the mind becomes peaceful, the joy comes from within, and we are able to feel that joy. So the joy does not lie in fulfilling the desire, but in elimination of the desire. We are trying to fulfill the desire to have joy, but immediately another desire is taking place. So the joy will never become permanent. You look into the whole world, ask everybody, who has become permanently happy by getting anything from the world? Nobody. Because again other desires will take the place, and again the mind will become distracted. Until we eliminate all the desires, the joy will never become permanent. This is a discovery, experimental discovery of the scientists of our country, the rishis. And they have recorded this discovery that it is so. And anybody is free to test it and do it. That is what they have in meditation also, but they don't think. In meditation, when they get the bliss at all, if at all it comes, if one is able to gain it, it comes at a time when he has forgotten about the world. There is no external contact at all. He is not thinking of the world at all. Then only the bliss dawns. The bliss is of the soul. It is a characteristic of the soul. Now our rishis further say that we are looking for joy because we are born of joy. We are born of ananda. He says, Anandadhyeva khalvimani bhutani jayante. That we are all born of ananda. Because we are born of ananda, what does it mean? Actually, we are born of the soul. Our soul, the property of the characteristic of the soul is ananda. We have come from there. So it is not that we don't know that the ananda is lying there. We are born of that. But forgetting that, we are running after other things. It is as long as we run away from our soul, run away from our real anchor, we will not get the joy at all. There will be small, small joy. When finally we get fed up and look within to find out who am I, who is running after the external world, after the objects, who is trying to avoid the disliked objects, who is trying to gain the liked objects. Only when we change the focus and focus within and discover the soul, then the ananda becomes permanent. It is, you think of the river, what is the origin of the river? It is coming from the sea. Is it not the evaporation of the sea which is giving birth to the river? The vapors are going, and finally it is shedding rain or snow on the mountains. And from the mountains the river starts. It flows. It doesn't know that I am running towards the sea. But it runs naturally by the gravity, depending on the terrain, the surface, etc. It runs. And finally, when it meets the sea, the running stops. What does he become at that point? The river becomes the sea. He no longer can identify that whether it is Ganges or it is Ganga or Yamuna or a Nala. Nothing you can see. Finally it is the sea. Exactly like that, our life also, because we are born of our real identity is the soul, that infinite soul. Until we get back to that, we may run around, but finally we have to get back to our origin. Until we get back to our origin, we will not have the fulfillment. We will never be able to free of all the desires, and we will never have the joy which we are looking for. The permanent joy will never come. Now in the process, the river is doing so much of service, is it not? When it is flowing from the mountain to the sea. In the process, so many plants are growing. Paddy is growing using the river water. So many animals are drinking that water. Human beings are drinking the water. Civilization is growing. It is simply flowing ultimately to meet the sea. It is flowing naturally. Like that, we also have a natural course of flow. If we flow with the natural harmony, then finally we will meet the goal, which is our soul, our real identity. But as long as we follow the natural course, it will be a life of benefit for the others, for the world. He will only, that Bhagavad Gita says, Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. The person will be engaged in the welfare of everybody. Normally, this flow in our life is getting distracted by the desires. We are not following the course. Suppose somebody is given to art. He is not taking to art because there is more money in IT. So he is studying IT, or she is studying IT and getting a job which is not of his or her nature. We are flouting the nature. So, surrender is actually to get rid of the desires or ragadvesha. And to have it, tremendous self-effort is necessary. Because we are always, because of the desires, we are always slave to the worldly objects, slave to the worldly gains, and slave to the hatred and dislike things also. We are slave to the worldly situation. To surrender, we have to remove this slavery and become connected to our real anchor, real identity, and connected to the natural harmony of life. To do it, we need a great self-effort. Suppose we think of, we had a diagram, but we don't have any projection facility here. Normally, what are we doing? Our focus is always on the objects. We are tied down to the objects. Our sense organs are tied down to the objects. Following the sense organ, the mind is also thinking of having what the sense organs like and avoiding what it dislikes. So the mind is following the senses. And to help the mind fulfill its objective, the intelligence is suggesting you do this way, then only you will get it. Is it not so? Whatever the sense organs like, to have that, the mind is always thinking how to gain it. And the intelligence is always guiding the mind that this is the way, and the mind is finally guiding the sense organs. This is the way you should get. This is the way you should go. So the whole personality, it is becoming slave to the objective situation. The indriyas, the sense organs, are slave to the objective situation. The mind is slave to the sense organs, and the intelligence is slave to the mind. So in the process, it is slave to the worldly situation. So the whole life is a slavery to the objective situation. Now, to attain this goal or the surrender, we have to invert the whole process. The slavery has to become mastery. For that, what do we have to do? We have to connect our intelligence to our real identity, the core identity, the soul. In our Shastras, it is called Viveka Buddhi. The intelligence, when it discriminates between what is real and what is unreal, what is permanent and what is transitory, where lies the permanent welfare, where lies the immediate satisfaction. When the intelligence discriminates all these things and looks for the permanent, it is called Viveka Buddhi. So if the intelligence is tied to the this Viveka Buddhi, to the reality of our existence, then that intelligence will guide the mind that where lies the ultimate goal, where lies our welfare. And then that mind will guide the sense organs also. Generally the sense organs cannot do anything on their own. Only when they have the support of the mind they can do. So what we have to do is to completely invert the control. The control system is now operated by the objective situation. The objective world, the world is controlling the sense organs. The sense organs are controlling the mind is controlling the intelligence. We have to control the intelligence with its real identity, the Viveka Buddhi, which is coming from its real identity, real anchor. That intelligence will control the mind, and the mind will control the sense organs. Then we will become master of the world, and we will not be slave to the world at all. Now the whole self-effort comes here. That is why Vivekananda said that only heroes can surrender. Only heroes can surrender. Why? Because it's a tremendous self-effort is necessary to win over, not to get overwhelmed by this slavery, to win over this control. We are now slave to the world. We have to become master of the world. So will it not need self-effort? Only by that self-effort, when the control is given to the soul from the Viveka Buddhi, then we understand that we don't have anything to do at all. My body, mind, personality is only a small speck in the whole universe. The whole universe is moving in its own natural manner. The galaxies are dying, the galaxies are getting born, the earth is going around the sun, the moon is going around the earth. On the earth, the plants are growing, the flowers are blossoming, the air is blowing. Is there any desire anywhere? There is no desire at all. There is no tiredness also. Suppose one day the earth says that I have been running for millions or trillions of years. Nobody is running like me. Today, let me take a little rest for a second. What will happen? The whole thing will get destroyed. They don't say like that. The flower, when it blossoms, the beautiful rose, it blossoms, it doesn't think that tomorrow whether anybody will see me and appreciate me. Does it think? You can find out the most beautiful flowers blossoming in Himalayas or in mountain areas where even sometimes no butterfly or bird will come. They are blossoming there. Not to see, they don't think that anybody will come and appreciate me. But we don't want to do anything if it is not appreciated. Even in an ashram also, if the Guru does not appreciate what we are doing, we feel rejected. Is it not so? The Guru is not appreciating, I am doing so much of work, but nobody is appreciating. Everywhere we look for appreciation. When we dress up, we think of the people where we are visiting and accordingly we dress up. We don't dress up beautifully as such. When nobody will see, then also we can dress up beautifully. At least the God will see. We don't say that. So the real surrendered life, it is like the blossoming of a flower. As the flower is blossoming with all its properties, its fragrance, its color. A red rose is blossoming as a red rose. A small grass flower is blossoming as a small white grass flower. He doesn't say that I want to become the rose. The rose doesn't say I want to become the grass flower. So they are equally beautiful. Only we are deluded sometimes. We don't look at the grass flower with equal attention. When we look at it, we will know that they are equally beautiful. The whole world is beautiful when they are natural. That the beauty lies in nature, in becoming natural. Like that, our life also becomes beautiful when we are surrendered, we flow the natural way. Now, I will come to Bhagavad Gita. This is the introduction to surrender. In Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter you will find Arjuna is preaching Krishna. Not Krishna is preaching Arjuna. Arjuna is saying that he knows what is dharma, what is adharma, and he is telling Krishna that if we fight this war, what all adharmas will take place. The one statement is that ahovata mahat papam kartum vyavasita vayam yad rajya sukhalobhena hantum swajanamudyataha. He said that we are out to commit a great sin because we are going to kill our own people for the greed of enjoying the happiness or comfort of kingship. Yat rajya sukha lobhena. Greed for enjoying the happiness of kingship. His mind was given to greed for enjoying the happiness, and he was thinking that he is fighting the war for winning over the kingdom and enjoying the comfort or the happiness of the kingship. The whole Bhagavad Gita is based on, not on Arjuna's these statements, but on the 7th verse in the 2nd chapter, where Arjuna is finally coming down from his egoistic position to a very humble position. He says, Karpanya dosho apahata svabhavaha prichhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha yat shreyasyat nishchitam bruhitan me shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. He says, Karpanya dosho apahata svabhavaha. After crying, wailing and getting scolded by Sri Krishna, finally he has come down from his egoistic position of preaching Krishna that we are out to commit adharma. Now he says, no, I don't know what is dharma and adharma. I am dharma sammudha chetaha. I am absolutely deluded about dharma. I am constricted in my mind. Karpanya dosho apahata svabhavaha. Prichhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. I am absolutely constricted in my mind. I am confused about where lies the righteousness, where lies dharma, where lies adharma. Yat shreyasyat nishchitam bruhitan me. Wherever lies the shreyas, you tell me without any ambiguity. Now this shreyas, this is the first time he is saying about shreyas. Shreyas means the ultimate auspicious goal of life. So by this he is confessing that he is a seeker of shreyas. He is not given to prayas. Prayas means the usual pleasant things of the world. So he said, earlier he said, Yat Rajya Sukha Lobhena, which is prayas. Rajya Sukha is prayas. So he thought that I am fighting for gaining some prayas. Now after getting scolded by Krishna, he comes down and he says, no, I am not a seeker of prayas, but I am a seeker of shreyas. Yat shreyasyat nishchitam bruhitan me shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. This last line is very important. Yat shreyasyat nishchitam bruhitan me. You tell me without any ambiguity where lies my welfare. Why will you tell me? Because Shishyasteham, I am your disciple. Otherwise you are not bound to tell me where lies my welfare. I have become your disciple. This is the first time. All along he had been calling Krishna as a friend, as a relative, equal. Here he is coming down to the position of disciple, the humble disciple. Shishyasteham, I am your disciple. The Shishya word means one who takes to the Shasana of the Guru. That means the discipline given by the Guru. So he says, I am ready to take the discipline. Shadhimam, you give your discipline. What am I supposed to do? Tvam prapannam. Why? Because I have taken refuge in you. I have taken refuge in you. When the disciple takes refuge in the Guru cannot but guide him. Because the disciple will not do on his own. He has to guide him. So Arjuna claims that I have taken refuge in you, so you must guide me. The whole Bhagavad Gita would not have come up if Arjuna had not uttered this verse. Unless the Shishya shows the humility and taking refuge in the Guru is not supposed to give him the jnana in its ultimate form. So the whole Bhagavad Gita gospel is based on this, where Arjuna is saying that I have surrendered at your feet, O Krishna, because Krishna is living in front of him. So he could say that I have surrendered. You give me, you tell me, give me your discipline, tell me what am I supposed to do, and I will do it. I have taken refuge in you. It's not that Arjuna succeeded in doing it always. As you go into the Mahabharata, you will find that he is failing, but fundamentally this surrender was there in him, which was not there in Yudhishthira and others. If you go into the details of Bhagavad Gita, you will find that every night they used to create a havoc in the camp after coming back from the war. Each brother will accuse the other brother. Arjuna will abuse Yudhishthira and then finally want to commit suicide also. All sorts of things he used to do. And all these things were being taken care of by Krishna. If you read, you will find that in Arjuna's statements, he will say so many things, blabber so many things, but the end line is always the same. But, O Krishna, you are a knower of truth. Whatever you say, I will do. And whatever Krishna says, he does it also, which Yudhishthira did not do. So although in surrender we will fail, but fundamentally this has to be there. For example, one day when I am diverting, one day when Yudhishthira was attacked by Karna and he was humiliated by Karna. Karna could have killed him easily, but he caught hold of his hair and said that, "Oh Brahmana, Pandit," because Yudhishthira was very knowledgeable person, he was given to that. "You do puja and Veda Patha and all. Why have you come to the war? Go, get back to your routine and study the Vedas. Don't come for war with me." So he felt very insulted. That was the time he had called for, when he was finding that he is not able to fight Karna, he had asked Arjuna to come in support. The message was somehow reached, but Arjuna could not come because there were other Maharathis to obstruct him. He could not arrive in the proper time, but Yudhishthira did not know about it. So when Arjuna entered the camp, Yudhishthira was already tired and injured and sitting in the camp. He immediately shouted at Arjuna saying that, "Where were you when I was calling you? Throw off your Gandiva." Gandiva means the bow. Arjuna was having the special bow. You throw off your Gandiva. Now Arjuna had promised that if anybody asks him to throw his Gandiva, then he will kill him. That was his promise, that he was respecting his bow so much that any dishonor to the bow or to his valor, he would not accept at all. He would kill, he will cut off his head. So he told that this is what I have promised and I have to do it because I have to follow whatever I have promised. So I have to kill my elder brother, which is a great sin. So Krishna said, no, you don't have to kill him. If you abuse your elder brother, then it is equal to killing him. Shastras say that the abusing the elder brother is equal to killing him. You don't have to kill him physically. So you abuse him. So Arjuna starts abusing the elder brother Yudhishthira. If you read, you will find what all things were there in Arjuna's mind. Even including Draupadi and all, so many things he has uttered there. He was abusing Yudhishthira left and right, so many things he said. But after abusing Yudhishthira, finally he said, now I have abused my elder brother. The Shastras said that if you abuse your elder brother, you better commit suicide. So I am going to commit suicide now. Krishna crossed his fingers and said, what is this now? Now this fellow is going to commit suicide. How to make them win the war if Arjuna commits suicide? But in all this saying, Arjuna, at the end of it, he says, but oh Krishna, this is why I should commit suicide. But Krishna, you are a knower of truth. Whatever you say, I will follow. Even before attacking Yudhishthira also he said, everything he said. But finally it ended with, oh Krishna, you are a knower of truth. So whatever you say, I will do. Then Krishna said, you abuse. Then he abused. Now he said, I will commit suicide, and there is a big lecture about it. At the end he says, but Krishna, you are a knower of truth. Whatever you say, I will do. Krishna says that Atma Shlagha, for a valorous person, for a valorous warrior, Atma Shlagha, you know, that boasting. I am this, I am that, I have killed this, I have gone this and done this and that. That is equal to commit suicide. For a real valorous person, if you boast about your valor, it is equal to committing suicide. So you boast about yourself. And Krishna boasts about himself. Arjuna boasts about what he has done, so many things he has done. He goes on doing all those things. Like that, my point here is not those details. My point is that although Arjuna was failing repeatedly in his surrender, he was failing. But at the end of it, he is coming back to his fundamental position that finally, oh Krishna, whatever you say, I will do. Now Krishna was standing before him as a living person. So, whatever Krishna says, he has to obey. Most of us, we are not able to. That is why in the end of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, you will find, he says, Gushyad Gushyataram Maya. That Krishna says that I have told you everything about truth. Everything about sadhana, everything about truth, I have told you. Even the Gushyad Gushyataram, the secret of the secrets also I have told you. Now, thinking about them, Yathechasi Tatha Kuru, you do whatever you like. That means what? I have told you everything. That this is this, this is that, this is the reality, this is your soul, this is one should do this, one should do that. Now I am living on you, you do whatever you want. That means still he is giving the option to Arjuna's ego, that he has to take his own decision, egoistic decision, because perhaps he felt that Arjuna is not yet the real disciple. So he left it on Arjuna. Immediately next shloka he says, but Arjuna, I cannot leave you like that because I am fond of you. You are my beloved. I cannot just leave it. So I will tell you the Sarvaguhyatamam, which is the most secret I will tell you. And what is that? Then he says, Manmana bhava mad bhakto mad yaji maam namaskuru. He says that you prostrate before me, you worship me. What is that? What does it mean? The Guru, in very rare instances, he takes this pedestal of God. He says that you have to fight the war. Although I have told you the truth, I have told you all the pursuits, whatever to be done, everything I have told you. But I know that in fighting the war, you will not remember anything of this. I have told you the Samatva Yoga, that is evenness of the mind. In success and failure, you have to keep your mind even. I have told you about Yajna, that Yajna is the universal Yajna of the Lord. Whatever we are doing, do it with Yajna Bhavana as a small contribution to the universal sacrifice, Yajna of the Lord. I have told you about Svabhava Karma, that what is the natural way, what is the surrendered way of moving. I have told you about Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, everything. But in fighting the war, you will not remember all this knowledge. You will not be able to, because it's a most involving action. At that time, what will you do? So, I am giving you the simplest solution, that you do whatever I say. You worship me as the ultimate truth, as God. You follow me and follow my words, whatever I tell you. That is the ultimate, the greatest truth. So that is called the surrender, ultimate surrender, which becomes real when the God comes down in the form of a Guru, and he is there to utter his words and for the disciple to follow the words. Now, when in practicing this surrender, we have two kinds of sadhana. As we have explained earlier also, the spiritual sadhana has got two branches. One we call non-interactional, another we call interactional. Non-interactional is when we are not interacting with the external world, that is, we are meditating or contemplating or reading and ruminating, sitting alone. That is the non-interactional. There is no interaction involved. And interactional is when we are out in the world, we are interacting with people, with world situations, world events, everything we are interacting. In both these sadhanas, how this surrender and self-effort, they work together. How we have to understand this self-effort, where it should be applied, and how it finally boils down to surrender in the last, in the ultimate level. Both in the interactional as well as non-interactional sadhana. That I will take up tomorrow, but to give you just the introduction, suppose we are trying to meditate. When we are meditating for realizing the self, we are meditating, any Brahma Vidya means we meditate for realizing the self. Now what is this self? The self is my real identity, is it not so? The subject in me. We are trying to realize the self. That means what is this real identity? I have a certain knowledge of the self. I know that this is my body, this is my mind, etc. But that is not the real identity. The entire spiritual scriptures, they say that the real identity of us, the soul, is one, infinite, unfragmented. Your soul and my soul is not different. It is one, universal, transcendental. That is the real identity. And we have to realize that identity. Now when we are meditating, trying to meditate, is it not initially a self-effort? First of all, you have to sit in a place, coming away from the worldly attraction and repulsions. Most of the disciples of Swamiji, they say that we don't find time. Initially perhaps 1 month they do some meditation and all. After that they say, 5 minutes I sit and I do the japa throughout the day. That means what? Their worldly involvement is not allowing them to sit even for 1 hour. Their worldly involvements are not allowing them to sit, make even 1 hour of time to sit for meditation. So when a person sits for meditation, he has to apply his self-effort to withdraw himself from the usual attractions, repulsions of the world, usual worldly activities which is not allowing him to sit for meditation. This is the first self-effort needed. Now, when you sit, you find that the mind is not on this, but the mind is still roaming around in the world. In the world events, world situations, who told me what, that person did, sometimes hatred, sometimes love, all sorts of thoughts. Mind is roaming around there. So the self-effort is to bring the mind back on our identity or on the mantra. If you have a mantra, to bring it down to the mantra and fix the mind on the mantra. So is it not a self-effort? And here most of the people fail. They are not able to succeed in having a good meditation where the mind will get absorbed. So the self-effort, tremendous self-effort is necessary there. But when we say self-effort, there is a stress involved in it. But the real self-effort is not that. Patanjali Sutras say that meditation, there are 3 things. One is Sukhasana. Sukhasana means sitting in a very comfortable pose. Initially it is that. There are various levels of understanding Sukhasana. The first level of physical understanding is sitting in a very comfortable pose. Because otherwise the body will be in the mind will be in the body. If the knees are paining, the back is paining, then you cannot meditate at all. It will be on the, meditation will be on the body. So Sukhasana is the first. The second is called Prayatna Shaithilya. Prayatna Shaithilya. Prayatna means effort. Shaithilya means loosening. Loose. That means to become effortless. To become effortless. Because always we are effortful. I have to meditate. I have to know the self. We are effortful. Unless that goes, the soul will not reveal itself to us. So the effort, now see how our self-effort is become effortless. I wanted to point out only that. There is self-effort necessary to become effortless. You will not be able to become effortless as such. To become effortless also you have to apply the self-effort, because normally you are given to a dynamic inertia or putting effort of knowing, of inquiring, of trying to do something. That tendency will have to go. Because the fruition of meditation comes from absolute effortlessness. What we are doing throughout the day is effortful. When we are seeing the book, actually my consciousness is getting engaged by the book. The book is revealed, but how is the book revealed? Is it not in my consciousness? The revealer, is it not the consciousness? Because finally what we are observing is the book revealed within, in our mind, in our consciousness. So, but the point is that our focus is on the book and not on the consciousness which is revealing the book. We are missing the consciousness. All external things throughout the day, our focus is on whatever is revealed, not on the revealer. The revealer is what I am, my real identity. The focus is on the revealed. Forget about the external world. When we are within, we are seeing the thought has come, a good thought has come, a fearful thought has come, mother's thought has come, father's thought has come, or the factory thought has come. Who is revealing the thoughts? My consciousness. So all these thoughts are also revealed by the consciousness. But our focus is on the thought, not on the consciousness. We are missing the consciousness there also. Focus is on the thought. So the consciousness is getting engaged by the thought. It is revealing the thought, and that thought is the focus. Always, whether it is external or internal, in all our efforts, the consciousness is getting involved in something small, something fragmented, something with color or without color forms or so. Am I clear? Either some concept or some external object or some thought. Every time the consciousness is getting engaged in it. When will the consciousness reveal itself? Only when it is not engaged by any small thing, any fragmented thing. Mark my word. The moment it is revealing the book, the focus is on the book, we are missing the consciousness. The moment is in my mother's thought, the mother is revealed, but the revealer is missed. When nothing in the world, including my own body, mind, personality, and I want to become self-realized, no such thought. Nothing is revealed. That is, the whole world is not there. My body, mind, personality is also not there. Then only the consciousness will reveal itself. It is the absolute relaxation position. Not only that, it is the position of supreme attention. Tomorrow I will take up. Kathopanishad says, Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo na medhaya na bahuna shrutena yamevaisha vrinute tena labhyaha tasyaisha atma vivrinute tanum swam. He says this Atma cannot be had by medha, talent, great mental power. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo, not by pravachana, prakrishta vachana, by analysis of the shastras, this as we are doing now. By that also it cannot be had. Na medhaya na bahuna shrutena. I have listened to various self-realized saints, big saints, famous saints, 100 times, 1,000 times. No. The Atma cannot be had by that also. Yamevaisha vrinute tena labhyaha tasyaisha atma vivrinute tanum swam. They have taken the example of marriage. In marriage, as we put our Varanamala on one, in the midst of all others, we are selecting one. Like that, one who puts the Varanamala on the self in preference to everything else in the world, Yamevaisha vrinute tena labhyaha, he can gain. How? Tasya esha atma swam tanum vivrinute. To him, the Atma reveals its own truth. Its own truth. So, when we are forgetting the world, the whole world is forgotten, including my own personality also. That I want this, I want that, that is also forgotten. No thought, nothing. Then the consciousness is not engaged by any fragmented, any small thing, any small expression. It remains absolutely free. And then the consciousness reveals itself. Atma reveals itself. Then we understand that we are surrendered. There is nothing to surrender at all. The whole Prakriti is going on, playing in its own manner with its three gunas. My body, mind, personality is a small speck in the whole universe. So it is also functioning as a speck in the universe. It is going on naturally functioning like the whole Prakriti. I am not doing anything. I am the soul infinite, only witnessing the whole activity taking place in the universe, of which the activities of my body, mind, personality is also there. So there is nothing to surrender anymore. We are surrendered, but we forgot and we thought that we have ego and we have to do this, we have to do that. I have done this, I have done that, and I have to do this, I have to do that. All those are coming from the delusion that I am separated from my real identity. I am a small identity, I am a small body, mind, personality. From that delusion, the whole concept of self-effort is coming. There is no self-effort needed at all. It's all a play of Prakriti. I am surrendered. Only I forgot that I am surrendered. We will take it up tomorrow in some more detail. Swarajya samrajya vibhutiresha bhavat kripa shri mahima prasadat prapta maya shri gurave mahatmane namo namastestu punarnamostu namo namastestu punarnamostu namo namastestu punarnamostu namastasmai sadaikasmai kasmai chinmahase namaha yadetat vishvarupena rajate guru rajate yadetat vishvarupena rajate guru rajate. Hari.
Thank you.